Ichigo's emergence after training for 3 months within the Dangai is easily one of my favorite transformations in all of anime and manga. He appears with that incredibly cool long hair, that tattered Shinigami Shihakusho, and that silent but stoic demeanor. The transformation is so stark that it feels like a totally new character has appeared before us. Dangai Ichigo finally emerging serves as the climactic resolution to the Arrancar arc as he faces off against the Hokyoku-empowered Aizen. Dangai Ichigo was Kubo's answer to a transcendent being who was insurmountable, who had surpassed the boundaries between a Shinigami and a Hollow. In this video, I want to deep dive into just how powerful Dangai Ichigo really was. Was he truly a transcendent being? How does he compare to the later forms of his true Bankai or the Horn of Salvation form? And was the Final Getsuga Tensho actually necessary to defeat Aizen? So without further delay, let's dive into just how powerful Dangai Ichigo really was. Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. The path to becoming Dangai Ichigo had started at his lowest point, after he had witnessed Aizen effortlessly defeat the captains of the Gotei 13, including his father Isshin, Urahara, and Yoruichi. Ichigo was spiraling into despair. What's amazing is that unlike other characters who were present, Ichigo could actually sense Aizen's overwhelming spiritual pressure. This was a hint at his latent potential that even he wasn't aware of. And it's at this moment that Isshin had made that vital decision which had changed the course of the story. He took Ichigo into the Dangai, the precipice world which exists between the Soul Society and the world of the living. Normally, this dimension is protected by the Koryu current and the Kototsu. Now, both of these elements prevent anyone from staying within the Dangai for too long, so that they cannot take advantage of the time distortion which exists within that precipice world. However, while Aizen was making his way over to the Soul Society, he ended up destroying the Kototsu, getting rid of one major factor which prevents people from staying in the Dangai. Now, it's important to know that time flows differently within the Dangai as it's much faster than in the outside world. Isshin explains that for each hour that passes within the world of the living, 2,000 hours pass within the Dangai, because time is much denser within that realm. This time dilation effect had thankfully allowed Ichigo to train for approximately 3 months while only 1 hour had passed within the real world. Now, there was just a small matter of the Koryu current, which thankfully Isshin was able to suppress by calling upon his Zanpakuto Engetsu. This had allowed Ichigo to undergo intensive training in order to learn the Final Getsuga Tensho from Zangetsu. Isshin tells Ichigo about the meditation method called Jinzen, where a Shinigami is able to enter into their inner world of their own choice. Usually a Shinigami enters into their inner world if the Zanpakuto spirit brings them to it, but the situation here is inversed. When Ichigo enters his inner world, he discovers something profound. The entire landscape has changed dramatically. No longer are there those tall, hopeful skyscrapers, as the entire scenery has shifted into the small suburbs of Karakura Town. This replica of Karakura Town is submerged underwater, as this is a visual representation of Ichigo's inner despair. While in his inner world, he encounters a younger manifestation of Zangetsu in his Bankai form called Tensai Zangetsu. The most shocking revelation comes when Tensai Zangetsu merges with his inner hollow white, creating a single entity which embodies both aspects of Ichigo's power. During this entire encounter, Ichigo learns that which Tensai Zangetsu wants to protect is very different to what Ichigo wants to protect, as we find out that his Zanpakuto spirit does not want to protect Karakura Town or the Soul Society, but it actually wants to protect Ichigo himself. The 3-month battle ends when Ichigo finally realizes that he needs to accept the blade of Zangetsu rather than defeat or overcome it. This allows him to acquire the knowledge for the Final Getsuga Tensho as this flows into him. The physical changes that we see in Dangai Ichigo, with his longer hair, his increased height, and his more mature appearance, these are a direct result of the 3 months of the accelerated time that he had experienced within the Dangai. Now, what's even more incredible is that Ichigo undergoes some significant spiritual changes, as his connection with Zangetsu at this point is fundamentally transformed. One major change that I haven't mentioned is how Ichigo's Zanpakuto partially fuses with his arm. The hilt of his sword has merged with his hand, creating a black glove-like covering. Meanwhile, the chain that normally hangs from the bottom of his hilt has extended dramatically, wrapping around his entire arm in a spiral-like pattern. Now, this wasn't done just for an aesthetic change, it represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Shinigami and his Zanpakuto. Aizen himself had theorized that the ultimate evolution of of a Shinigami is if they were able to fuse completely with their Zanpakuto. We see this even with Aizen as he merges with Kyoka Suigetsu after his transformation with the Hokyoku. The hilt of his Zanpakuto has also merged with his hand. Ichigo achieved a very similar state, but through completely different means. It wasn't through an artificial enhancement via a wish-granting orb, but through understanding and accepting the different aspects of his power, as that blade of Zangetsu was run through him, as he understands that he needs to become one with Zangetsu in order to become the Getsuga, which is the major requirement for the Final Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo's Shinigami Shihakusho has also changed as it becomes more tattered and open at the chest. Kubo previously in the story established the state of Ichigo's Bankai coat directly links to his remaining spiritual power. The fact that his coat remained mostly intact despite the intense training within the Dangai suggests that Ichigo's spiritual power had not only been preserved, but it has grown exponentially. Even the facial expressions and demeanor of Ichigo have changed dramatically here. He is no longer emotional and impulsive like a teenager, as he now has a calm, stoic demeanor, as he is a focused warrior with an almost detached gaze. He has the look of someone who has transcended normal concerns and emotions. This wasn't the face of someone who is excited about acquiring newfound power or anxious about an upcoming battle. This was the face of someone who understood exactly what needed to be done, and he had accepted the sacrifice that it would require in order to achieve his goal. The physical changes in Dangai Ichigo were not symbolic in my opinion, they reflected the truth that Zangetsu had always tried to convey, that Zangetsu is you. At this point with Ichigo's transformation, the line between Shinigami and Zanpakuto had somewhat merged, as they ended up becoming a singular entity, representing the ultimate stage of a Shinigami's evolution which Aizen had sought through artificial means. In order to truly appreciate Dangai Ichigo's power, we need to understand what transcendence means within the context of Bleach. The concept was introduced by Aizen during his transformation via the Hokyoku. Basically, transcendence happens when a being surpasses the boundaries between a Shinigami and a Hollow, ascending to a higher dimensional plane of existence. Aizen explained this using a dimensional analogy. Just as two-dimensional beings cannot perceive or interact with three-dimensional beings, those who haven't transcended cannot sense the spiritual pressure of those who have. We see this during Aizen's battle with Isshin, Urahara and Yoruichi, who were all captain level Shinigami, but at some point during the battle they were no longer able to sense Aizen's Reiatsu after he had transformed. What makes Ichigo's case fascinating is that he was inherently capable of transcendence due to his unique heritage. He was born from a Shinigami father and a Quincy mother who had been infected with Hollow Reiatsu. Ichigo possessed the perfect combination of powers in order to naturally break the barriers between the species. This explains why Ichigo was able to sense Aizen's Reiatsu when no one else could. He already had the potential for transcendence within him, and this is what Isshin had recognized. When Ichigo had emerged from the Dangai, the evidence of his transcendence was immediate. Aizen, who was previously able to sense Ichigo's spiritual pressure with ease, suddenly realizes that he cannot detect it at all. At first, Aizen theorized that Ichigo had sacrificed his spiritual pressure in order to acquire physical strength. This was the only explanation which had made sense to him, because think about it, only an hour had passed. How much could Ichigo have really achieved in that hour? Now in actuality, what had really happened here was that Ichigo had transcended to a level beyond even Aizen's comprehension. The key difference between their transcendence is in how they achieved it. After Aizen had acquired the Hokyoku, he evolved via an artificial means in order to forcibly evolve beyond his limits. This was an unnatural process reflecting Aizen's desire to stand above all others. Ichigo, however, achieved transcendence through acceptance and understanding of his own power. He ended up becoming one with Zangetsu and accepted all aspects of himself, including his inner hollow here. This natural transcendence versus artificial transcendence is important to understand. Aizen's transformation was impressive, but it was ultimately incomplete, as he was still further evolving, searching for even more power. Ichigo's transformation, on the other hand, was complete from the very moment that he stepped out from the Dangai. He had fully realized his potential, resulting in more of a stable and arguably powerful form of transcendence, which was able to overcome Aizen. The battle between Dangai Ichigo and Aizen provides us with our most clearest window into understanding how overwhelmingly powerful this form of Ichigo was. From the moment that Ichigo appeared, the dynamic of the battle was completely inverted from their previous encounter in Fake Karakura Town. When Ichigo first clashed with Aizen, he immediately demonstrated his superior speed by effortlessly grabbing Aizen by the face and dragging him away from the real Karakura town in order to fight in an isolated location. This wasn't just a tactical move, it was a display of complete physical dominance over someone who moments earlier had been untouchable. One of the most impressive feats of Dangai Ichigo was demonstrated when his clashes with Aizen began to affect the surrounding environment. A single casual sword swing from Ichigo generated enough force to destroy nearby mountains. What's crucial to note is that Aizen initially believed that it was his own power which caused the destruction, as he was unable to fathom that Ichigo had surpassed him to such a degree. The most telling demonstration of Ichigo's power was when Aizen had utilized Hado 90 Kurohitsugi with full incantation. This was a spell that was so powerful that Aizen claimed it could distort space and time itself, capable of crushing opponents at the atomic level. Yet Ichigo casually shattered it with a single hand, dismissing the spell as if it were nothing more than a child's game. The gap in their power had become even more staggering when Aizen had started to grow desperate as he unleashed his hollow-like transformations. Even after evolving via multiple stages thanks to the Hokyoku, his attacks were still barely able to scratch Ichigo. When Aizen used Fragor, an attack with the explosive force of a small nuclear detonation, Ichigo emerged with only minor burns on his arms. He then responded with a casual sword strike that overpowered Aizen's Ultra Fragor, a technique that combined multiple Fragors into a single incredibly destructive attack. Now, if we are putting this into perspective, Aizen in his transcendent form had effortlessly defeated multiple captain level Shinigami, including Yamamoto, albeit through the help with Wonderwise. But you have to remember that he was still able to overpower Urahara, Yoruichi, and Isshin, all who are formidable fighters in their own right. But Dangai Ichigo single-handedly was able to make this version of Aizen look like an amateur. The most significant aspect of this battle wasn't just the raw power difference, but it was Aizen's inability to comprehend Dangai Ichigo. Throughout the series, Aizen had been portrayed as the ultimate chess master, always thinking several steps ahead of everyone. He always has a plan for everything, but yet when he was faced with Dangai Ichigo, all of his carefully planned keikakus and his smart-ass assumptions ended up crumbling. For perhaps the very first time in the series, Aizen was truly afraid of his opponent. He wasn't just afraid of defeat, but of something that he was unable to understand or control. Aizen wasn't just afraid of losing, but he was afraid of something that he just couldn't properly comprehend. Now we move on to the Final Getsuga Tensho, which represents the absolute peak of Dangai Ichigo's power. This is a technique that's so devastating that it requires the ultimate sacrifice. When Ichigo activated this ability, he underwent yet another transformation, as he had become Getsuga itself. His hair ends up turning this jet black color and it extends down to his waist. His body becomes wrapped in bandages of spiritual energy, and this blue flame-like Reiatsu emanates from his arm. What makes the Final Getsuga Tensho truly unique is that it's not just a simple attack, it's a state of being. By becoming one with his Zanpakuto's ultimate technique Getsuga Tensho, Ichigo is essentially transformed into the embodiment of the attack itself. This is why Tensei Zangetsu was so reluctant to teach him this technique, as it represents not just the peak of Ichigo's power, but it's also the end of his power as a Shinigami. The actual attack that Ichigo fires off is called Mugetsu, which translates to moonless sky. This manifests as a wave of pitch black energy which is able to completely engulf Aizen. Mugetsu was so powerful that it temporarily neutralized the Hokyoku's regenerative abilities, and it had severely wounded Aizen to the point where Urahara's Kido sealing spell was able to take effect. When we see Mugetsu within the manga, it's depicted as a black void which blots out the sky. This perfectly symbolizes the absolute all-consuming nature of this attack. The cost of using this power was equally absolute, because after using Mugetsu, Ichigo started to lose his Shinigami powers completely. This wasn't just a temporary weakening or a feeling of exhaustion, it was actually a fundamental severing of his connection to his spiritual abilities. Ichigo's power didn't just deplete, it burned out entirely. It was like a star that had consumed all of its fuel in one brilliant flash. What makes me emotional about this sacrifice is that Ichigo entered the battle with Aizen knowing full well what it was going to cost him to win. When Tensei Zangetsu revealed the price of the Final Getsuga Tensho, he was in tears, not for himself but for Ichigo. Yet Ichigo accepted this sacrifice without hesitation, understanding that protecting his friends and family, heck and even the world in this situation was worth way more than his power. Ichigo's willingness to sacrifice everything is what truly separates him from Aizen. While Aizen sought power for its own sake, continuously reaching for more power regardless of the cost to others, Ichigo on the other hand was willing to give up the very power which had defined him and had allowed him to protect those that he had cared about. The Final Getsuga Tensho wasn't just Ichigo's strongest attack, it was the ultimate expression of his character and the values which had driven him to this point in the series. Now, the comparison between Dangai Ichigo and his later transformations in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, like his true Shikai and Bankai, as well as his Horn of Salvation, always occurs, as these transformations represent different aspects of Ichigo's journey and his growth to acquiring more power. Following the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Ichigo finally gained his true Zanpakuto. Unlike his previous sword, which was molded from a suppressed version of his power, his new Zangetsu represented the harmonious integration of his Shinigami, Quincy, and Hollow abilities. His true Shikai manifested as dual blades, where one represents his Hollow and Shinigami powers, and the other sword represents his Quincy powers. His true Bankai, though we see very little of it due to Yhwach breaking it, is presumed that this combines all aspects of his powers into a singular connected form, and I've theorized in previous videos on my channel that Ichigo's true Bankai in the 1000-Year Blood War arc had the power to shatter fate. Ichigo's Horn of Salvation form, which he had used during his battle with Yhwach, incorporated aspects of his full Hollow Vasto Lorde form, but this time he was able to maintain his consciousness and control over his body. This form allowed him to combine a Grand Ray Sero with a Getsuga Tensho, a unique feat which demonstrated his mastery over both his Shinigami and Hollow powers. So which form is stronger? The debate continues amongst fans, but there are some compelling arguments for Dangai Ichigo retaining the title of Ichigo's strongest form. Dangai Ichigo was able to achieve true transcendence, as his spiritual pressure couldn't be sensed by other transcendent beings like Aizen. We never saw definitive evidence that Ichigo's later forms reached this same dimensional plane of existence. Dangai Ichigo was able to dominate a fully evolved Hokyoku-empowered Aizen with minimal effort. While true Bankai Ichigo was able to defeat Yhwach momentarily, it still required the assistance from others, as well as specific conditions needed to be met in order to achieve this victory. Now, people who are on the side of Ichigo's true Bankai or his Horn of Salvation form being stronger than his Dangai form always point to areas like Ichigo's true Zanpakuto represented his complete power without the suppression of Old Man Zangetsu, and his battle experience had grown considerably by the time that the final arc had rolled around. And additionally, there's the argument that Yhwach was arguably a more powerful opponent than Hokyoku-empowered Aizen, as Yhwach had possessed the ability to see and alter the future. What makes this comparison rather complicated is that Dangai Ichigo was a temporary state and it was tied to a specific technique, while Ichigo's true Bankai and his Horn of Salvation forms appear to be more sustained transformations which represent his complete power. Ichigo's Dangai form with his Final Getsuga Tensho was a brilliant but brief supernova, but Ichigo's Horn of Salvation and his true Bankai form are his permanent, complete evolutionary forms. Perhaps the most accurate assessment is that Dangai Ichigo represents Ichigo's absolute peak power, but at an unsustainable cost. I can make a parallel to a Hunter x Hunter example where Gon had achieved his adult transformation, but again it was a peak of his power which had come at an unsustainable cost too. I'm bringing it back to Bleach. Ichigo's true Bankai or his Horn of Salvation form represents the most powerful sustainable form which he was able to achieve at that point in the story. His Dangai form and his later forms in the 1000-Year Blood War arc are totally different expressions of power, each impressive in their own right. I've spoken in previous videos how Dangai Ichigo embodies the Buddhist concept of enlightenment through sacrifice and understanding, a theme that Kubo weaves throughout Bleach. Ichigo didn't achieve the power through shortcuts or external enhancements like Aizen, but he had confronted his inner self and had accepted his powers as an integral part of who he was. This stands in contrast to Aizen's artificial evolution, as this highlights the ongoing themes that we see within Bleach of enlightenment, sacrifice, and even delusion. I absolutely love the design for Dangai Ichigo, with Zangetsu merging with his arm, that stoic expression on his face, and his incredibly cool flowing long hair. In this transformation, without him even uttering a single word, we can tell just how truly powerful Ichigo Ichigo has become. But now we have reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you guys think about my breakdown of Dangai Ichigo? If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments, and whether if Dangai Ichigo was stronger than Ichigo's later forms that he had revealed during the 1000-year Blood War arc, like his true Bankai or his Horn of Salvation form. I personally believe that Dangai Ichigo is stronger for the arguments that I've stated in the video. That was the peak of his ultimate power, which had come at an unsustainable cost. But I'd love to know all of your thoughts, so continue the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.